The Gloriana Set by ThebeMoon, read by Ella Max Mabella. Chapter 14. Fallout. Hermione slipped down to breakfast early the next morning, hoping to eat quickly and return to Gryffindor Tower until ancient ruins. But she was still discovered outside the great hall doors by a handsome Slytherin, thankfully not Malfoy. "Hermione," Theo said, striding towards her. "You weren't at dinner last night. Ginny said you were ill." "Just tired," she said. "Nothing to worry about." He gave her an impish grin. "We'll have to find better reasons than studying to stay up late." "Perhaps." She couldn't help smiling back. "In the meantime, I've caught up in transfigurations and herbology, and Slughorn is helping me brew 2 potions after dinner tonight." Hermione was pleased. "And there's only our Defense Against the Dark Arts seminar. That's today, and trust me, it has not been demanding. Just remember, love is the only defense." Theo chuckled. "I'm looking forward to that class." "That makes one of us." Hermione was beginning to think Bluebell was another Professor Trelawney. "I want to thank you properly," Theo said, shifting his shoulder back almost weighty as Hermione's own. "Would you care to go to Hogsmeade with me sometime?" Hermione hesitated. Her last date in Hogsmeade hadn't gone well, and an outing with Theo would only cause more talk. Then she saw Malfoy's tall form emerge from the dungeons and pause beside the house hourglass cabinet. "I'd love to go to Hogsmeade with you," Hermione said loudly. She leaned into Theo and kissed him on the cheek. "See you in patience," she whispered with a wide smile. Before Theo could respond, she flounced into the great hall and sat at the Gryffindor table, her back to the Slytherins, flushed with her own recklessness. "That's how much I want you, Malfoy." Ginny showed up soon afterwards, sitting opposite her. "Both Malfoy and Theo are staring, and Malfoy looks particularly dangerous," she said, keeping her voice low. "And Blaise?" Hermione asked. Ginny rolled her eyes. "Yes, he's looking over here too. There must be something in the water. I met Blaise in the astronomy tower last night, and he had this subtle vibe, like being kissed by him was this great honor. I finally had enough and walked out." "Subtle," Hermione said, gloomily stirring her porridge. "I'd kill for subtle." "Well, I've had it with the Slytherins." Ginny poured herself a goblet of pumpkin juice. "I can't wait until Saturday's match. We'll flatten them."
"We sure will,"
Ron said, sliding into the bench beside Hermione.
"Hey, Hermione, that ferret tried to sneak into Gryffindor Tower last night, but I sent him packing."
Ginny snorted, drawing a glare from Ron. He clenched his fists and turned around to look at the Slytherin table.
"Keep your voice to yourself, you gets,"
he muttered, turning back.
"Hey, save it for the field, Ron," Ginny said.
Ron grinned.
"They have no chance on Saturday, with those new chasers of ours."
He and Ginny launched into a detailed Quidditch discussion, squabbling about plays against Slytherins. Bored, Hermione finished her porridge and pulled out her loop notebook, its open pages wrinkled and creased. She smoothed them with her wand, then fished out her pen. There had been no chance that morning to write 5 things to look forward to. Today's list would be easy. 1. Not looking at Malfoy. 2. Not speaking to Malfoy. 3. Not thinking of Malfoy. Hermione froze, fingers clenched on the notebook. Scribbled in the margins of her draft. Organization is its own reward essay was a single note, written in an elegant, loopy hand that was horrifyingly familiar.
Like a good organizational plan, a secret torrid affair can be its own reward.
Her breath caught. He knew. He'd read her notebook, even the parts about him. Especially the parts about him. It would take more than a few random dots in the runes to fool that man. That was why he'd been so confident in Charm's classroom. He'd read about her feelings. He knew. Hermione's face burned with shame, then anger, and she bolted upright, turning towards the Slytherin table. Theo looked over at her with concern, but Malfoy was already gone.
"Hermione?"
Ginny asked. "I forgot my homework," she said, shoving her loop notebook back into her bag. She would throw the wretched thing into the fire the first chance she got. She swung her leg over the bench and stormed out of the great hall to Ron's cry,
"Hermione never forgets her homework."
She pounded up the stairs to ancient ruins, and there he was, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. His shoulders were slumped, his head down, but Hermione barely registered this unusual posture.
She halted in the middle of the hallway and threw her back aside. "You!" she snarled. He straightened. "Granger, look, I'm so— You!" The single syllable dripped with vitriol. "You read my notebook! You read my thoughts!" Malfoy stepped into the middle of the hallway facing her. "Now, Granger, it was open, I just—" He trailed off as Hermione began to circle him, and he eyed her warily. "So clever, aren't you, Draco Malfoy?" Her voice was icy. "So smooth with the turn of phrase." She completed her circuit and just looked at Malfoy, unblinking, and she could see his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. "Yes," she said softly, "everything in that notebook is true. Is that what you want to hear?" She advanced, and now he was the one stepping back. "Do you want to know all my fantasies, Malfoy? Is that what you want?" She inched closer. "Go ahead, pull them out of my mind. I'm a rubbish at Clumens. Would you like to watch all the imagined stolen kisses? The imagined games of search for the snitch?" Malfoy choked. "Granger, but why stop here?" She went on, relentless. She didn't know what her own face looked like just then, but Malfoy's was bloodless. "Go on, Malfoy. Take what you want. Look at all my fantasies. About you, about Theo. Run, Harry." She smirked. "Professor Snape in 6th year." Malfoy looked away, his hair falling over his eyes. "Please, Granger." "No?" Hermione had him backed against the wall now, his hands at his side, palms flat against the stone. "That's not what you wanted." "No, you just wanted to read a few warm thoughts about yourself, and then use them on me." She laughed harshly. "It is truly a brave new world, one where Draco Malfoy tries to seduce Hermione Granger. A secret affair with a mudblood? It must be true, mustn't it? I have it in writing." Malfoy cleared his throat. "Granger, don't," he said, trying to sound stern. "You are taking this all wrong. You have to—" "I don't have to do anything," she said. Her rage faded, leaving her empty. Malfoy's face blurred. "Granger, please, listen." Malfoy was pleading now. "I never meant to—" He broke off as McGonagall appeared, heels clacking and hat bobbing, with the rest of the class trailing behind her. She gave Malfoy and Hermione a sharp look before opening the classroom door and shooing the other students inside like baby ducks. The interruption helped Malfoy regain some poise, and when Hermione looked back at him, he was frowning down at her. "Obviously, I went about this the wrong way," he began. "Stop, don't even try," she snarled, pulling out her wand. "You don't care about me, Draco Malfoy. You don't care about my feelings. You only care about your own dick. So why don't you go and just fuck yourself?" Her voice had risen during this speech until she was shouting the last words. A spark flared from the wand she was now pointing at Malfoy, and an invisible force knocked her backward into the wall. She fell on her rear, gasping, wand clattering to the stone floor. "How dare you!" she cried. "I didn't!" Malfoy's face was shocked. He stepped forward, hand out to help her up, but she grabbed her wand instead and scrambled to her feet. "Don't touch me!" she shouted.
"Miss Granger, Mr. Malfoy,"
McGonagall snapped. The headmistress stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her face a thundercloud.
"If you are quite finished—"
"Quite finished, headmistress," Hermione said. She swung away from Malfoy, grabbed her back, and entered the classroom, head held high. A harsh curse resounded from the hallway, and the class heard McGonagall cry out,
"Mr. Malfoy!"
When McGonagall re-entered, Malfoy was not with her. He didn't appear in potions either, and Neville counted seconds while Hermione and Slughorn coached more pairs towards successful fiduciars. Hermione felt like a block of ice inside. She could hardly listen in Transfigurations, and skipped lunch again to have a good cry in a warded bathroom. Then she washed her face, found Ginny to heal her swollen eyes, and they headed to Defense Against the Dark Arts seminar. Theo was outside the classroom when Hermione arrived and touched her elbow to draw her away from Ginny. "I hear you tell Draco to fuck himself outside Ancient Runes," he said. "Yes," Hermione said, glad the rumour mill had actually gotten it right this time. "I'm sorry to have missed it. I'll do it again if you like." Again that impish grin. "I'll hold you to that." "Time for class, everybody!" Blue Bell caroled from inside. Malfoy was inside, lounging in his yellow beanbag as usual, closely watched by his nervous classmates. When Hermione entered with Theo, the stares shifted to her. She willed herself to stay calm and took her seat between Ron and Malfoy. Bluebell had conjured a beanbag for Theo next to Luna, so that he was opposite Hermione. He looked at her, eyes twinkling, as Bluebell reviewed her "love can defeat any evil" thesis. Then Ron read aloud Hermione's scroll about Malfoy's lovable qualities. Malfoy's scroll on Ron, delivered in frigid tones, listed his absurd yet serviceable small owl, his excellent care for his substandard Quidditch broom, and a veiled suggestive compliment for Ginny. Ron's face heated, but he said nothing, and Bluebell looked satisfied.
"And now, Mr. Nut," the fairy said, turning to Theo, "why don't you list 3 things you love about a classmate?"
"Which classmate, Professor?" he asked calmly, the picture of dignity even on a fat pink beanbag.
"Anyone you like, dear boy."
Theo spoke in a clipped voice. "I love how Hermione Granger's curls elude any attempts to capture them, no matter how large the ribbon or hair clip. I love how she gives every person she speaks with, whether friend or foe, her entire attention, staring them down until they can hardly look at her. I love how her formidable brain constantly wars with her feelings, making her every statement unpredictable." He looked at Bluebell. "Will that do?" If Hermione thought her scene with Malfoy that morning was embarrassing, this was 1,000 times worse. Theo thought that? What had she gotten herself into? What was it with these Slytherins? Ron to her right was hissing like a boiling tea kettle, while Malfoy on her other side was rigid and silent. Bluebell clapped her hands.
"Well, isn't that just lovely? Splendid to have older students who can express their feelings so. And it's a perfect introduction to our next lesson, unpredictability. Most humans are very predictable, even witches and wizards," Bluebell continued. "Every day they eat the same thing, they take the same routes to work or school, even repeat the same conversations. So it only stands to reason that they would fight in predictable ways as well."
The whole class sat stunned by yet another trenchant display of logic by the flighty fairy. Even Hermione was impressed.
"With the most cursory of study, a witch or wizard can predict what his or her foe would do in nearly any situation."
The fairy rose about a foot in the air and spun slowly, letting her words sink in.
"When you are defending yourself against a practitioner of the dark arts and you are plotting your next move, your question should not be, what spell is the most powerful, but what spell is the least predictable?"
She spun again.
"Can anyone give me an example of this concept in action?"
Ron, of all people, raised his hand. "In first year, we were fighting a troll, and Harry Potter stuck a wand up the troll's nose." Hermione was instantly taken back to that day. She was so certain she could handle that troll, and only ended up pressed against the bathroom wall, waiting for her death, when Harry and Ron burst in. The day they defeated the troll, the day they became friends. She reached out and took Ron's hand and squeezed it, tears in her eyes, feeling the icy block in her chest thaw somewhat. He patted her hand, smiling, and she put her head on his shoulder. Some things she could trust anyway.
"Very good,"
Bluebell clapped her small hands, beaming.
"In many cases, a simple, less powerful action or spell is quite effective if it's unpredictable, whereas a powerful yet expected move may fail to find its mark, yes? Can anyone else give me an example of unpredictable response?"
Hermione could think of 6 examples off the top of her head, but she kept her hand down for once. She was more interested in hearing others' accounts. Malfoy sat stiffly beside her, his hand clenched. She ignored him.
"My father had a story from the Battle of Hogwarts,"
Ginny began and swallowed.
"He told me how Kingsley Shacklebolt faced a Death Eater apparating through a window. Instead of aiming a curse at him, Kingsley cast a momentum-reversing spell, sent the Death Eater flying backwards to his death."
The entire class looked at Malfoy then, clearly imagining him flying backward through Bluebell's window to his death. Except for Hermione, who stared at a point above Theo's head. Ernie Macmillan recalled using Flipendo during a classroom duel once, while someone else described how Pavati used a bodybind curse on Dolohov. Lavender trembled in her beanbag and said nothing.
"Wonderful, wonderful examples. Let's try an exercise,"
Bluebell said.
"Everyone pair up and stand opposite each other, one's out. Each pair will be given an advanced offensive spell, which can be defended by any minor defensive spell."
Hermione ran through her mental catalogue of minor spells, which were extensive. Ron looked at her, and she nodded. Partners. The other students paired off quickly, leaving Malfoy with Theo, to Hermione's amusement. The two Slytherins looked eager to face off. Ron tugged at her hand to gain her attention. "Go easy on me, Moy," he whispered. "Your simplest spell could drop a horse." Bluebell flitted between them.
"Miss Granger, you are to cast Petrificus Totalis,"
Ron groaned.
"Excellent,"
Hermione said loudly.
"I found Petrificus Totalis very effective."
She turned to Ron and lifted her wand slightly.
"Petrif?"
Tickles exploded around her ribcage, causing her to drop her wand with a clatter.
"Run!"
she gasped, giggling uncontrollably.
"Run, stop!"
Ron looked down at her, grinning. "Gotcha," he said, ending the spell. She leaned against him, still giggling.
"Good one,"
she said. Chaos had broken out among the other partners. Neville had beaten off a Levicarpus with an augmenti water spell so powerful that it soaked Luna completely. Lavender aimed a surprisingly well-cast Confundo at Ginny, who spun in circles, tripped over Ernie, who was on the grassy floor recovering from a stinging jinx, and fell into a giant daisy. Theo, meanwhile, had cast a stunning spell at Malfoy, who managed to get off a leglocker curse at the same time. Theo's spell went wide, smashing a globe on top of a tall cabinet. Malfoy now stood over Theo, wand aimed at his throat, while Theo lay on his back, legs snapped together. The blonde Slytherin looked every inch the deadly Death Eater, and everyone was staring.
"Mr. Malfoy,"
Bluebell said,
"come now."
Malfoy flicked his wand at Theo, whose legs shot straight up, then out, then up again.
"Mr. Malfoy,"
the fairy repeated. Malfoy's lip curled, but he released his partner.
"Now reverse positions,"
Bluebell instructed. Hermione had been the first to turn away. She now faced, twirling her wand like a baton.
"Look out, Weasley,"
she said with an evil smile.
"Take it easy, Moy,"
Ron said nervously.
"Expelliarmus,"
Bluebell told them as she flitted by. Out of the corner of her eye, Hermione saw Malfoy cast a Carpa Retractum charm, a fiery rope spinning out of his wand, with Theo transformed into a harmless snake. Theo muttered a few words, and the snake immediately slithered out a half-open window. Hermione couldn't help but stare. Theo was a parcel mouth.
"Hermione," Ron asked, "are you ready?"
She turned back to him and grinned. "Always." One swallowed and held up his wand.
"Wingardium Leviosa,"
Hermione said crisply, barely moving her wand, and Ron shot straight up, hovering face down just a few inches from the ceiling.
"That's not fair,"
Ron shouted down at her.
"Too advanced."
"We learned it in first year," she called back.
"Yeah, with a feather."
"I don't know my own strength. Leviosa."
"Let me down,"
Ron yelled. She brought him down slowly to the floor.
"Little swart,"
he said fondly. She smiled. It was good to be friends again. Chapter endnotes. A book containing a character's secret thoughts is like a loaded gun in this type of story. If it's introduced in the first act, it's bound to go off. Objects, especially personal objects, are big in this story, revealing so much about character. Draco and Hermione in particular will continue to squabble over objects, everything from the house hourglass to 6 bushels of clover blossoms. And Malfoy's luck he'd left breakfast by the time Hermione read her loot, or she would have been screaming at him in the Great Hall. To be continued.
Thank you for listening to The Gloriana Set by ThebeMoon, read by elamexmabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on AO3, YouTube, or Spotify.